He spent his last $3 on a dying bull. What it did next made headlines. The crowd was already thinning when Eli Ward stepped through the iron gates of the Trenton stockyard. Dust hung in the still air, swirling around his worn boots as he moved past the empty pens and half-loaded trailers. The auctioneer's voice echoed off the tin roof, tired and strained, wrapping up the day's final lot. Eli didn't look up. He didn't have the money for cattle, not really. All he had were 3 crumpled dollars in his pocket and a sick feeling in his chest that told him today might be the last time he had any choice left at all. "Next up, we got a cripple," the auctioneer called, half laughing as 2 handlers dragged out a sagging, bony bull with a limp in its rear leg and one horn chipped nearly to the root. Its hide was dry and cracked, eyes dull. One of the handlers muttered under his breath, "Ought to put him down." The men in the stands didn't argue. One guy chuckled and stood to leave. Another tossed a sandwich crust into the dirt. "Won't last the night," someone jeered. Eli's gaze locked onto the bull's eyes. There was something in them, buried under the pain, the hunger, the long months of being forgotten. It wasn't fear. It was defiance. The same stubbornness Eli had seen in the mirror more times than he could count. The auctioneer shrugged. "No bids? All right, we'll—" $3, Eli said, raising his hand. The whole pen went quiet. Someone coughed. The auctioneer blinked. "3? Son, you know that won't even pay for the tag." "It's all I've got," Eli said, stepping forward, voice steady but low. "I'll take him." The handlers exchanged looks. The auctioneer gave a half laugh, shook his head, and slammed the gavel. "Sold, for $3 to the man with nothing to lose." Eli walked up to the bull slowly, quietly. The creature didn't flinch, didn't move. Up close, the damage was worse than it had looked from the gate. Old scars, sunken ribs, hooves cracked and dry. But when Eli reached out and laid a hand gently against its neck, the bull blinked and leaned into the touch. "What's your name, big guy?" Eli muttered. "You're too stubborn to die, I can tell." He loaded the bull, barely able to stand, into the battered trailer hitched to his rusted pickup and drove out of the yard, past the men still watching, past the crooked signs and wind-blown flyers. His hands gripped the wheel tight as he headed west toward the only place he had left, a forgotten plot behind an abandoned church on the outskirts of Clayford County. The setting sun bathed the land in orange, and in the rearview mirror, Eli could see the bull watching the road like it meant something. They arrived after dark. The old church stood like a shadow on the hill, windows boarded and roof sagging. Behind it, the overgrown field was fenced just enough to keep things in, or out. Eli parked, climbed down, and opened the trailer gate. The bull didn't move at first. Then, with a wheezing grunt, he stepped out, legs trembling beneath him. Eli guided him into a makeshift pen patched together with splintered wood, old piping, and hope. "I'll call you Gideon," Eli said, settling into the grass beside the pen. "Because you're still standing, and so am I." For the next few days, Eli gave Gideon what little he had: clean water hauled from the church's broken pump, feed bought on credit, and care drawn from experience. He cleaned the old wounds carefully, wrapping each with cloth torn from his own flannel shirts. He talked to the bull each morning and every night. Sometimes Gideon snorted softly in reply. Other times he just watched Eli with those tired but focused eyes. By the end of the week, Gideon stood straighter. His ribs still showed, but his steps were firmer. Then one morning, Eli found the bull slamming his horns into the corner post of the pen, cracking it with one final blow. He stared at the shattered wood, stunned. "You got fight left in you," Eli whispered, a smile creeping across his face for the first time in months. Later that evening, while nailing the broken post back into place, Eli heard footsteps crunching the gravel. A tall man in dusty boots and a leather coat walked up, hands in his pockets, eyes hard. "That your bull?" Eli stood slowly. "Who's asking?" "Name's Cole Mercer," the man said, flashing a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I run the Iron Rodeo. We do stunt fights, bull versus man type shows. Heard about your Gideon here through one of my boys. He's got a reputation already. Mean, smart, still standing." "He's not for sale," Eli said quickly. "I'm not looking to buy," Cole replied. "I want to rent him, one night. Local event in Granger's Bend. You handle him. We pay $2,000, cash." Eli stared at the man. That money would cover feed for months, fix the fencing, get real medical care. But his stomach churned. Those circuits were nothing but pain. Bulls driven mad. Men thrown in for sport. "He's not a fighter," Eli said. Cole raised a brow. "You sure? Because the way he just broke that post says otherwise." Eli looked over his shoulder. Gideon stood calm now, chewing hay, but his eyes followed every movement. "All right," Eli said finally after a long pause. I handle him. He doesn't get hurt. Not once. Cole grinned and held out a hand. Deal. The event was held 3 nights later in a fenced dirt arena behind a rundown biker bar. Beer cans littered the bleachers and floodlights buzzed overhead, casting a flickering yellow glow. Eli stayed by Gideon's side the whole time, brushing him down, whispering commands. When the gate opened, the crowd roared. Gideon charged, but not wildly. He ducked a rope, spun clean past a man with a fake cape, and faked a charge that sent another stumbling backward into the dirt. For 15 minutes, he outmaneuvered every challenger thrown at him. He didn't gore, didn't trample, just made fools of them all. When the gate slammed shut again, Eli rushed to his side, checking for blood, bruises. There were none. He's got brains, one spectator muttered. No, Eli whispered. He's got judgment. Cole was waiting with a fat envelope. That bull's got something I've never seen. We want him next week. Same setup. I'll double the pay. Eli hesitated. His pride said, walk away. But his debt, his hunger, Gideon's feed, all said otherwise. Same terms, he said. I stay with him the whole time. Sure, Cole nodded. Course. As Gideon's fame grew, Eli started noticing things. A tall man in a black suit stood at the edge of the crowd each show. Never spoke, just watched. Took notes. Cole always seemed to find him afterward. Whispered exchanges. Money passed. One night, while Gideon rested in the trailer, Eli doubled back to Cole's private tent. He heard movement and peeked through the flap. Inside, Cole was leaning over another bull, this one foaming at the mouth, and plunging a syringe into its neck. Eli burst in. What are you doing? Cole looked up, calm. Helping the poor thing perform. These crowds want violence. Can't get that with sleepy bulls. That's poison. No, Cole said with a grin. It's adrenaline. You want headlines, don't you? Eli stared at him, heart pounding. He thought of Gideon, the broken post, the quiet strength, the scarred trust that took days to earn. I want him alive, Eli said coldly, and untouched. Cole spread his arms. Then keep him that way, but don't pretend this world is clean. Eli walked out without another word, fists clenched so hard his nails cut into his palms. He looked toward the trailer. Gideon's silhouette stood tall inside, unmoving, watching the sky. The cheering behind him still echoed. But to Eli it already sounded like warning bells. Gideon wasn't just a bull anymore. He was a symbol. And Eli wasn't going to let anyone use him, not again. Gideon barreled across the dirt arena with frightening grace, weaving past swinging ropes and snapping nets, his hooves carving deep grooves into the ground. The crowd erupted, beer sloshing from plastic cups, boots stomping on metal bleachers. A man lunged at the bull with a foam-tipped spear, trying to jab toward his flank, but Gideon sidestepped sharply and sent the attacker sprawling with a head feint and a whip of his horn. Eli watched from the edge of the ring, fists clenched at his sides. His heart pounded not just from fear for the bull, but from a growing disgust. These weren't just stunts anymore. They were ambushes wrapped in cheering crowds. This latest gauntlet was Cole Mercer's idea. 4 men in protective gear attacking from all sides. The plan was to push Gideon's limits and give the crowd a thrill, as Cole had put it. But Eli had seen something else. The handlers weren't just playing rough. They were aiming high, going for Gideon's eyes, his knees, vulnerable spots. By the time the 4th man rushed in, Gideon's breathing was ragged, his muscles twitching from stress. He charged, but not blindly. He knocked the man's spear aside, twisted, and kept running, straight toward Eli at the gate. Eli didn't hesitate. He threw the latch open and stepped forward, arm raised. Gideon stopped inches from him, panting, shaking, his flanks slick with sweat. That's enough, Eli said aloud, his voice low but sharp. We're done. Behind him, the crowd booed and jeered. Cole appeared from the side with 2 security guards. What are you doing, Eli? He shouted, his expression tight. He's got another round in him. Eli turned toward him, his voice calm but final. You want another round, you get another bull. Gideon's finished. You don't pull him mid-show. That's breach of... Try me. Cole stopped, measuring the distance between them, jaw clenched. But he didn't move closer. Instead, he gave a nod to the guards and backed off. You're making a mistake, he called as Eli led Gideon back to the trailer. The bull's just getting started. That night, back at the temporary pasture behind Mike Barrow's auto shop, one of Eli's last trusted friends, Gideon wouldn't settle. He paced the fenced lot, flinching at small noises, his side rising and falling in heavy bursts. Eli sat beside him on the hay, whispering softly and stroking his neck until he calmed. Just past midnight, Eli heard something. A soft clink, a latch shifting. He stood quickly and rushed to the gate with a flashlight. The back section of the fencing had been cut, clean through with bolt cutters. In the corner near the feed trough lay a plastic container, the label half torn. Eli picked it up and sniffed. His throat tightened instantly. It was doped, tainted. He spun, searching the shadows, but whoever had done it was long gone. Eli didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. He reinforced the fencing with steel poles, added motion-triggered lights, and moved Gideon's sleeping area closer to the shop wall. But he could feel it. Eyes in the dark. Whispers in the alley behind the lot. Someone wanted the bull. Or worse, wanted him gone. Then came the visit. Eli was restocking feed in the shed when he noticed a long black car parked near the end of the gravel lot. The windows were tinted. One door opened and a man stepped out, dressed in a fitted charcoal suit, polished shoes, and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "Mr. Ward?" he asked smoothly, his voice like sand on silk. "I'm Victor Crane." Eli didn't respond right away. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked the man up and down. "I've heard the name." "Then I'll save us both time," Crane said, stepping closer. "I represent several private investors interested in acquiring Gideon. We'd like to offer you a clean sale, $200,000, cash, no questions asked." Eli stared at him. "You think he's just a piece of meat?" Crane smiled. "I think he's a remarkable creature with rare market potential. But yes, he's an asset, one that could be managed more efficiently." "No," Eli said, voice flat. "He's not for sale." Crane's smile didn't fade. "You might want to reconsider. Sometimes the best way to protect something is to hand it over before someone else takes it." Eli stepped closer. "If you or your people come near him again, I'll bring down everything you've built. That's not a threat. It's a promise." Crane didn't reply. He straightened his cuffs, turned, and got into the car. It pulled away without a sound. That same night, someone broke into the pasture again. This time they didn't leave poison. They left blood. Eli found Gideon just after dawn, collapsed near the feeding trough with a deep slash along his ribs. Not fatal, but bleeding fast. Eli dropped to his knees, pulling his flannel off and pressing it against the wound. His hands trembled. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Come on, big guy. Don't you quit on me." He worked for hours, cleaning and stitching the wound using an old kit from his rodeo days. By the time the bleeding stopped, his hands were raw, and his shirt was soaked in sweat and blood. He stayed beside Gideon through the night, head resting on the bull's side, listening to his heartbeat. The next morning, Eli had made up his mind. This wasn't survival anymore. It was war. While Cole was away at an event, Eli broke into his trailer. He searched under floorboards, in cabinets, behind loose wall panels. In a false bottom drawer, he found it, a flash drive taped to a black folder marked Stinger Ops. He took both. Back at the shop, he plugged it into his laptop. What he found made his stomach twist. Videos, dozens of them. Bulls pumped full of stimulants, some collapsing mid-fight, others dying, handlers laughing as they jabbed cattle with tasers. And then, one file labeled Project Pharos. In it, spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and surveillance footage showed animals being loaded into unmarked trucks, destined for unauthorized testing labs. Victor Crane's name was on the ledger, so was Cole's. Eli copied everything and mailed it anonymously to Mason Holt, an old rodeo journalist turned independent reporter. He didn't include a return address, just a note. "You wanted the truth. Here it is." That evening, Eli went public. He announced Gideon's retirement online, posted a short video, and added, "No more shows. No more blood. He's not coming back." By the next morning, his truck wouldn't start. The wires had been cut. A week later, the shop itself was burned to the ground in a suspicious fire. Luckily, Gideon had already been moved the day before. Eli's instincts had kicked in, and he'd taken the bull to the only place left that no one would think to look: the old canyon cabin. It sat in the Broken Ridge Valley west of Clayford, a property once owned by Eli's grandfather, long abandoned and barely held together by nails and ghosts. Eli cleared the land by hand, built a new pen with steel wire and concrete footers, and dragged every tool, rope, and salvageable part from the ruins of the shop out there over 2 days. There were no neighbors for miles, no cell signal, only a half-working satellite phone that could make emergency calls, and a battery-powered radio for weather alerts. Eli didn't sleep much. Instead, he trained. He set up flags, buckets, bells. He taught Gideon new vocal commands: sharp clicks for turn, low whistles for stop, red flags for hold, blue for move. He placed wooden dummies in the field and guided Gideon's charges like clockwork. The bull wasn't just responding, he was anticipating, reading Eli's posture, waiting for cues. Every night, Eli sharpened his plan. If anyone came, he'd be ready. Gideon wouldn't run anymore. He would defend. And so would Eli. There, with a broken satellite phone and dwindling supplies, Eli trained Gideon not for show, but for defense. Eli didn't hear them at first, not over the wind cutting through the canyon or the rhythmic sound of Gideon's breath as the bull trotted alongside him. The two of them had just finished a training round, and Eli was giving hand signals under the wide blue sky, watching Gideon respond with near-military precision. But when he turned toward the narrow path leading to the lower valley, he caught the unnatural crunch of gravel. Too heavy, too deliberate. His gut twisted. They had found him. He crouched low and signaled Gideon to stand still. The bull obeyed immediately, his hooves sinking into the dust as his dark eyes fixed on Eli, alert but calm. Eli moved behind a boulder, his heart thudding against his ribs. From the ridge above, 5 figures came into view, all in matching green jackets with patches that mimicked official wildlife services. But Eli saw through it instantly. The gear was too new, their boots too polished, and not a single one of them looked like they'd spent a day in the wild. One man held a rifle. Another carried a thick baton. None of them smiled. Eli pressed the button on the small remote clipped to his belt. The trap went off in an instant. A burst of white light exploded from the top of the ridge. Homemade flash grenades crafted from old camera flashes and powdered magnesium. The men cried out, shielding their eyes, stumbling backward. Gideon let out a warning snort that echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Then came the screeching wail, another trap, this time a series of sirens Eli had rigged to old car batteries and hidden in the rocks. The sound bounced between stone, distorting into a monstrous howl. "Control your animal!" one of the men shouted blindly, voice panicked. Eli stepped out from behind the boulder, holding a red flag high. "He's more controlled than you think," he said, voice steady but loud enough to carry. "Back away before he finishes what I started." Gideon advanced, hooves stomping the earth as dust lifted around him. His massive frame moved with eerie calm, guided by every flick of Eli's wrist and the direction of the flag. The men turned to run, but the path was narrow. One slipped on the loose rock and crashed into the others, sending all of them sprawling. Gideon didn't charge. He simply paced sideways, positioning himself between Eli and the men, snorting like a furnace. His muscles twitched beneath his coat, ready but restrained. The moment burned into Eli's mind as he raised his phone and hit record. The footage showed everything: the false uniforms, the ambush, the traps, and the silent partnership between a man and a bull. That evening, the video made headlines across the country. It was sent first to Reese Banner, the same journalist Eli had trusted with the original footage. Reese didn't hesitate. The video went live with the headline, "Bull and Trainer Defend Themselves from Private Mercs in Canyon Standoff." Within hours, it was everywhere. Support poured in from corners Eli hadn't expected. Retired ranchers, veterinary scientists, former rodeo trainers who had long stayed silent. People offered land, supplies, even legal representation. A national animal rights organization called Voice for the Voiceless offered a full legal team to protect Gideon from being reclaimed or euthanized. Eli was no longer a lone man with a bull in the rocks. He had become the symbol of a larger fight. But while support came in waves, retaliation came faster. Victor Crane, the man behind Behemoth Industries, was summoned before a congressional panel investigating illegal animal testing and trafficking. Cole Mercer, Crane's right hand and the mastermind behind the traveling Behemoth Bull Tour, was caught trying to flee the country. Customs agents found falsified veterinary records and a case of synthetic tranquilizers in his luggage. He was detained on the spot. Still, Eli didn't let his guard down. Each day, he trained Gideon with more precision, introducing new cues, adjusting signals, and even teaching him to detect aggressive body language. Gideon wasn't just learning commands, he was learning judgment. One evening, as the canyon glowed orange with the setting sun, Eli stood by the corral fence, watching Gideon rest his head against a weathered post. The bull's breathing was steady, calm, but Eli's wasn't. His hands trembled slightly. He knew the fight wasn't over. "You've got more eyes on you now than ever, big guy," he murmured, brushing a hand down Gideon's flank. "Let's make sure they see the truth." The opportunity came sooner than expected. A major press event was organized in Denton Hollow, hosted by Voice for the Voiceless. It was meant to show Gideon's recovery and training, prove to the public and lawmakers that the bull was not dangerous, but intelligent, alert, and deeply bonded with his trainer. Ranchers, reporters, and activists gathered around a temporary stage built in the field outside the sanctuary. Drones buzzed overhead. Cameras flashed. Eli stood center stage, holding his red and blue flags, speaking into a handheld mic. "This isn't about proving that Gideon is safe," he said, voice rising with conviction. "It's about proving that he was never the problem to begin with. What was done to him was abuse. What we've done together is recovery." The crowd applauded. Gideon stood calmly a few paces behind him, tethered loosely but relaxed, eyes scanning the field. That's when it happened. A man emerged from the side of the crowd, clean-cut, sunglasses on, moving fast. Too fast. Eli noticed him a second too late. He held a cattle prod, its metal tip sparking faintly with current. He charged the stage without a word. Before Eli could react, Gideon did. The bull lurched forward with startling speed, not with violence but purpose. His left side crashed into the man just as the prod raised, knocking him backward off his feet. The cattle prod skittered across the stage and fell into the dirt. The attacker landed hard, wind knocked out of him, eyes wide in panic. The crowd went still. No one moved, no one spoke. Then the cheering started. Reporters snapped photos in a frenzy. Cameramen zoomed in as the man was pulled away by security. Gideon stood still, his chest heaving, waiting for Eli's next cue. Eli stepped forward slowly, placed a hand on the bull's shoulder, and looked out over the crowd. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message was loud and clear. Gideon wasn't just a survivor. He was a protector, and the world had finally seen who the real animals were. Because nobody else would. 3 months later, Gideon stood beneath the rising sun, his thick frame calm and still in the soft golden light. The hillside was quiet, covered in morning mist that clung to the grass like breath held too long. He stood tall in his pen at the highest point of the Clayford Ranch, land that once lay in ruins, now rebuilt piece by piece through quiet determination and the kindness of strangers. Below him, rolling pastures stretched outward, dotted with young cattle and their handlers, all watched over from this quiet summit. At the center of the pen was a simple bronze plaque, newly mounted on the post where Gideon often leaned, scratched, and surveyed his home. It read, "This land was saved by a bull who never gave up, and the man who believed he could." Eli stood just outside the fencing, arms folded, a light breeze brushing strands of hair across his brow. His boots, worn and faded, crunched over the gravel path as he stepped closer to Gideon's gate. He watched the bull nudge at the post with the same stubbornness he had shown in that final canyon charge. A faint smile crossed Eli's face, but there was no pride in it, just quiet gratitude. Gideon had lived, and not only that, he had changed everything. The Clayford Ranch had once been nothing more than a scorched ruin after Victor Crane's men torched it in a final effort to break Eli's spirit. But after the video of Gideon's defiant stand went viral, donations came pouring in, not just from animal lovers but from ranchers, journalists, and even former handlers who had walked away from the circuit in shame. A grant from the Ashwood Wildlife Trust followed soon after, and with it, the ability to buy back the land that once belonged to Eli's father. Eli didn't live there anymore, not permanently. He stayed in the valley, near the rescue stables where he now trained young handlers. But he came back often, especially at sunrise, when the light hit Gideon's pen just right and turned the air into gold. He remembered the trial like it had happened yesterday. Victor Crane, once untouchable, stood in the courtroom flanked by federal marshals. His empire, built on cruelty, bribes, and forced silence, crumbled the moment Eli stepped into the witness box. His footage, unedited, time-stamped, and backed by affidavits, was the spine of the case. But it was Gideon's final stand that broke through to the jury. When the video was played in court, the room went silent. Not just because of what the bull did, but because of who had believed in him when no one else would. Eli's testimony didn't waver. He recounted every detail, from the underground auctions to the training pits, to the night Gideon collapsed on the canyon floor, ribs cracked, eyes half shut, bleeding from a dozen cuts. And then how he stood back up, not for rage, not for revenge, but because Eli had called his name. Crane's defense fell apart by the second week. His attorney tried to blame rogue handlers, falsified records, and even suggested Gideon had been drugged to act out. But Cole Mercer, once a ring manager, now a state witness, shattered those lies. He admitted everything, the rigged fights, the abuse, the payouts to local authorities. He named every handler, every transport route, every hidden auction house across 6 states. Mercer's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, but the judge made it clear he would never walk free again. He would live behind bars, his name forever tied to the thing he tried to run from. When Eli passed him in the hallway during a recess, Mercer couldn't meet his eyes. "I didn't think it would end like this," he muttered, barely above a whisper. Eli didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed the conviction, everything moved fast. Crane's estate was frozen, his assets seized, and the underground circuit scattered like rats in daylight. Several other arrests followed, including judges, land brokers, and sheriffs who had quietly protected Crane's empire for years. But none of that changed the way Eli moved through the world. He wasn't interested in interviews, book deals, or praise. The world had called him a hero, but Eli didn't wear the word like a crown. It sat on him like weight, not glory. Instead, he threw himself into his work. He joined a small team of trainers and vets at the newly founded Ashwood Recovery Center. They specialized in animals rescued from illegal fighting rings. The handlers were all men like Eli, rough around the edges, some with criminal records, all with something to prove. Eli didn't judge. He trained them the same way he had trained Gideon, slowly, patiently, and always with trust first. Word spread. Boys from the city came out to volunteer. Ranchers who'd once scoffed at the idea of ethical handling now sent their sons to learn under Eli. The foundation they built in Gideon's name, the $3 stand, grew faster than anyone expected. It didn't just rescue animals, it saved men too. Those who had been lost in cycles of violence, anger, or silence found purpose again. One afternoon, a boy named Marcus, barely 16, all wiry limbs and nervous energy, approached Eli after a long day in the pens. He held out a letter. "From my uncle," he said, eyes cast down. "He was there that day, when you stood by Gideon. He said it changed him." Eli took the letter gently. Inside, the handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. The man had seen the footage, left the fighting circuit, and now ran a small sanctuary in Missouri. He credited Eli and Gideon for saving his soul. "I didn't think it was possible," the letter ended. "But if a bull can stand back up after that, maybe I can too." Eli folded the letter carefully and handed it back. "Keep this," he said. "It belongs to you." The bull grunted, then nudged his shoulder with surprising gentleness. Eli leaned into him for a moment, hand pressed to the thick, scarred hide that had once seemed so fragile. They stood in silence, the ranch below glowing with faint porch lights, the hills turning dark around the edges. Eli exhaled, slow and steady. "Still got fight in you, huh?" The bull didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes said enough, calm, clear and strong with a will that had outlived the ring, the canyon, and the cruelty of men. Eli looked up at the horizon, where the sky met the hills, and the wind whispered through the trees. He'd spent his last $3 on a dying bull, and what it did next made headlines.